Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome here. It's good to see everybody come out this cold morning to worship in this way. So before I get into the topic that I want to share on this morning, before I introduce the title, I'm going to give you an anecdote that has been circling the internet for some time recently, and this anecdote is often attributed to the late ruler of Dubai by the name of Sheikh Rashid. And here's the story. Once when Sheikh Rashid was asked about the future of his country, he replied, "My grandfather rode a camel, my father rode a camel, I ride a Mercedes, my son rides a Land Rover, and my grandson is going to ride a Land Rover. But my great-grandson is going to have to ride a camel again." So when he was asked to give an explanation of why he said that, his reply was this: "Hard times create strong men create easy times create weak men, and weak men create difficult times. Many will not understand, but you have to raise warriors, not parasites." So a little bit of fact checking on the internet soon reveals that probably the actual story and the explanation are from two different sources, and they're often attributed to different people and so forth. So it doesn't appear to have quite a linear story as often is given. But in any case, let's just assume that the concept is worth considering. Do hard times create strong people? Do easy times create weak people? Let me start over here. Yeah, do hard times create strong people? Do strong people create easy times? Easy times create weak people, and weak people create difficult times. So I think there's certainly some truth to it. It's probably oversimplistic. For example, one person's easy time could be another person's difficult time. So it certainly is not a linear thing. It's probably a cycle, but it could be debated what actually causes what. But let's at least consider that it's worth considering, and we'll talk about the concept a little bit, and particularly if there's a way to interrupt the cycle. If this is a cycle, is there a way to interrupt the cycle? So the title that I want to share is Sharing and Suffering Through Intentional Sacrifice. That's the title. Sharing and Suffering Through Intentional Sacrifice. But in thinking about difficult times and hard times and all of that, when I hear stories about my grandparents, Roxanne's grandparents, and even my parents, it does lead me to conclude that we do stand on the shoulders of giants who have endured some difficult times. And in many ways, we do have it easier than what they did in many cases. A friend of my father once observed that when he was first married and started farming, that he could not afford the labor-saving devices that would have made the work on the farm much easier. So he simply, buckled in and did the hard labor. But by the time that he had sons who could actually help with the labor, he could now afford the labor-saving devices. And his sons never had to learn that difficult, back-breaking work that the father engaged in. And my father would often wonder these same questions too. When he would go to the dealership and buy a new tractor, remember him doing that a couple times in my time at home there. Go to the dealership, buy a new tractor, buy a new skid steer, buy a new feed grinder for us boys to make life better on the farm, if you will. He would ask this question. He would say, "Are you really learning the values that you should be valuing by these purchases that I'm purchasing? Or are you becoming, weak, entitled, and materialistic?" And he would like wonder those things out loud to me as he was considering making these purchases. And he was concerned that he wasn't producing men that were entitled, weak, and materialistic. And I also, think many times about Roxanne and the story that she tells about growing up as a 12-year-old girl, getting up in the pre-dawn darkness and going across the road and across that parking lot that seemed like a mile away, but it was only maybe 300 feet or even 100 feet, and milking 65 cows before breakfast. Like if I would require that of my daughters or even my sons to go out and milk 65 cows at 12 years old, they would call that cruel and unusual torture, I think. And yet that was life. That is what they did. And it just makes me think that our children live a much easier life than what we were even raised with. Now, I did hear some really encouraging news this morning. Rachel said that she walked to church this morning. It's like 2 degrees below zero. I mean, your parents didn't force you to do that, did they? No, you did that on your own. Okay, well that's encouraging that you're enduring some hardness there. That's good. Glad to hear that. So the question is, like, where am I on that strong and weak continuum, and where are my children in that strong and weak continuum? How does this actually work? If our parents and grandparents have created lives of relative affluence for us, and we in turn have made it even easier for our children, will there eventually be a reckoning where future generations will be forced to face difficult times, whether of their own making or imposed upon them by others? Is there a way to intentionally circumvent this cycle? That's the question that I want to ask this morning. And I think there is. We as a family, we've discussed this several times. I'd heard this anecdote on the internet, on social media, and I was driving the other day, a few weeks back, and I was sharing it with Adam and Aaron. They were riding with me, and we were discussing it. And we got home in the evening, and as we were having family council, as we call it, devotions, we were discussing it some more. And we concluded that there probably, if it is true, if this is a cycle of easy times creating a weaker generation, and that in turn produces difficult times, is there a way to circumvent the cycle? And we concluded that there probably is. At least taking a simplistic view of this, we can say there is a way to circumvent it. So listen to the words of Paul to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2, 1 through 7. I'm just going to read this, and this I did a copy and paste off the Bible Gateway as I was typing this up, so I think it's actually in the New King James Version. You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men, who will be able to teach others also. And then verse 3 is the key verse here that I wanted to highlight. Share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No soldier gets entangled in civilian pursuits, since his aim is to please the one who enlisted him. An athlete is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. It is the hardworking farmer who ought to have the first share of the crops. Think over what I say, for the Lord will give you understanding in everything. Verse 3, share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. The question is, what does it mean to share in suffering? Is there a way that we can intentionally share in suffering? Basically, to make lives harder for ourselves, to actually engage in the sense of hardness and suffering. So is there a way to do that? I think there is, and I'm going to highlight 3 ways this morning. I think there's probably more ways to do that, but I'm going to talk about 3 ways in which we can train ourselves to actually endure hardness. First of all is fasting. Fasting is a way in which we can voluntarily engage in suffering. The second one is giving, and the third one is investing in others. Now, giving and investing in others could really be, almost the same. But in terms of giving, I want to think of that in terms of the actual giving of alms or money or things like that. Whereas in investing in others actually would have more to do with maybe time and also actually working to make the lives of others better. So let's start with fasting. So the first thing that we want to notice about fasting is in Matthew 6:16, and I'll just read the verses there. It's actually 16 and 17 and 18, I believe. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So the thing that we want to observe here, what Jesus says about fasting is that he expects it. So Jesus doesn't have any teaching here on fasting as far as why you should fast and that you should fast. He simply says when you fast. So there's an expectation here that the followers of Jesus will fast. And then he gives instructions about how to go about this fast. But it's not a question of whether you should fast or not. It's a given that the follower of Jesus will fast. So what is the benefit of fasting? Well, fasting is a voluntary restriction of food. And food is good and needful. So basically it builds your self-discipline muscle. There's also health benefits and things like that. But at the bare minimum, it builds your self-discipline muscle. If you can restrict that which is good and needful, you'll be better situated to eliminate that which is wrong and harmful. So I think that is the spiritual benefit of fasting. Interestingly enough, in Isaiah 58, God also chose a fast. He says there that is not this the fast that I have chosen. And then he actually says what the fast is. Interestingly enough, it's not even really about restriction of calories there. It's actually about breaking yokes of evil and things like that. So I'm actually going to look at those verses, but not until I get to the last part that actually talks about where we're going to talk about investing in others. So just one more anecdote about fasting beyond the spiritual benefit of training your self-discipline muscle. There was some interesting studies done, hunger studies done in mice. And I guess mice are relatively anatomically identical enough, or similar enough rather, to humans that there are apparently some interesting lessons that can be made. So I'm going to read the results of this study here. And then there was some spin-offs from the study and some different interpretations of the data and so forth. So I don't think we'd take more from it than what it's really worth, but just listen to this. So the mice in each diet group were divided into 3 subgroups. So the diet groups were basically by what they were eating. So one group of mice got to eat fruits and vegetables, another got to eat protein, and so forth. I'm not sure what all the diet groups were, but they divided them into diet groups. So the mice in each diet group were divided into the 3 subgroups based on how often they had access to food. The first group of mice had access to food around the clock. They could eat whenever they wanted to. The second group of mice was fed 30% less calories per day than the first group. Okay, so they were restricted to the 70% of the calories of those that had access around the clock. The third group was meal-fed, given a single meal that added up to the exact number of calories as the round-the-clock group. Both the meal-fed and the calorie-restricted mice learned to eat quickly when food was available, resulting in longer daily fasting periods for both groups. The scientists tracked the mice's metabolic health through their lifespans until their natural deaths and examined them post-mortem. Here's the results. Meal-fed and calorie-restricted mice showed improvement in overall health, as evidenced by delays in common age-related damage to the liver and other organs, and extended longevity. So again, basically, those that were meal-fed, who had the same number of calories that was available to those that ate around the clock, and also those that were restricted by 30%, they had increased longevity and overall health. Interestingly enough, there was one commentator on this that said that the mice that had the 30% restriction in calories lived 30% longer, but they were mean and aggressive. So probably not a great trade-off there to exchange a longer life to be mean and aggressive. But interestingly enough, those that were restricted to 1 meal a day, they actually also demonstrated a 30% longer life and did not exhibit any of the meanness and the aggression. So it's kind of a plug there for intermittent fasting, I guess, which I actually happen to practice. But in any case, what it does show is that we are not intended to satisfy our senses all the time. There needs to be a voluntary restriction of the satisfying of our senses. And the desire to just eat obsessively, all the time is not healthy for us. So one way in this modern era, when we have just total access to calories round the clock, is to voluntarily make the restriction that we're only going to eat, inside of a certain window, that we won't eat outside of that. I'm speaking primarily to adults. I think children have needs that are different than that. But fasting is a way in which we can actually voluntarily learn to restrict the impulses of the flesh. That's the basic point that I'm trying to make here this morning. That is a way that we can actually share and suffer. Actually learn to embrace the feelings of hunger. Longer term fasts obviously are even more beneficial. Okay, so let's talk about giving now. And this too comes from Matthew 6 and verses 1 through 4. So Jesus presents giving as normal. So take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them, otherwise you have no reward of your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have the reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly, will himself reward you openly. So again, just notice that, as I mentioned, that Jesus presents giving and the doing of good deeds, giving of alms, as a normal part of the experience of being a follower of Jesus. Also, let's take notice of Paul's commendation to the Philippians. So if we read here, and we'll read these verses, Philippians 4, 10 through 18, we're not going to look at all the context surrounding it and why the giving was even happening and so forth. But let's just read and just listen to what Paul is saying here in Philippians 4, 10 through 18. But I rejoice in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Notwithstanding, ye have done well, that you did communicate with my affliction. Now ye Philippians know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but you only. For even in Thessalonica you sent once and again to my necessity. Not because I desire gift, but I desire fruit, that may abound to your account. But I have all, and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable and well-pleasing to God. So here the church of Philippi had raised a collection to send to Paul to aid him in his ministry. And he's saying, thank you. It was a good thing to do. And it's a proof of who they were. It's a proof that they were followers of Jesus. He says, I desired fruit that may abound to your account. So he was commending them for their generosity and letting them know that this was a normal part of the Christian experience, and that it was that they were blessed by God for doing so. So I want to look at the last way here now that we want to look at this morning. That's investing in others. So we looked at fasting briefly, looked at giving briefly, and now investing in others. Again, as ways that we can voluntarily restrict our living to be able to bless others who are less fortunate. So I want to read now what God says in Isaiah 57. And I'm going to read this, in fact, I'm going to read it in the Septuagint because I just like how it flows there. So let me find that here. I just got the Septuagint, so I still don't know where to find the books in here. Their order's messed up from the way I'm used to. So, all right. So Isaiah And this will be chapter 58, Isaiah 58. Cry aloud with strength. So listen to what God is saying here to these people and the response back to him. Cry aloud with strength and spare not. Lift up your voice like a trumpet and declare to my people their sins, and to the house of Jacob their lawlessness. They seek me day by day and desire to know my ways, as a people who did righteousness and did not forsake the judgment of their God. They now ask me about righteous judgment, and desire to draw near to God, saying, why have we fasted, but you did not see it? Why have we humbled our souls, but you did not know it? Now here the explanation comes. Because in the day of your feasts you seek your own wills, and mistreat those under your authority. If you fast for condemnation and quarrels, and strike an humble man with your fists, why do you fast to me, as you do today? So your voice may be heard in crying, I did not choose this fast, nor if you should bow your necks like a ring, and should bow your neck like... I'm sorry, let me go back there. I did not choose this fast, and such a day for a man to humble his soul, nor if you should bow your neck like a ring, and spread sackcloth and ashes under yourself. Could you thus call such a fast acceptable? I did not choose such a fast, says the Lord. Rather, loose every bond of wrongdoing, untie the knots of violent dealings, and cancel the debts of the oppressed, and tear apart every unjust contract. Break your bread for the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house. If you see a naked man, clothe him, nor shall you disregard your offspring in your own household. So, typically when we think about fasting, we're thinking about the voluntary restriction of food. But God is saying here, like, you're doing all of that, but I'm not paying attention to it, because along with your fast, you're fasting for strife and debate, and you're fasting for all the wrong reasons. It's like, here's the fast that I've chosen. And he lists the things out as to what it is that he wants in a fast. So it's obvious from this portion, this chapter, that you can fast for the wrong reasons. But the right reasons are listed here as to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke, to share your bread, to bring the homeless to your house, and to clothe the naked. Those kinds of sacrifices is what God would have been happy with. So I'm going to read now a series of tweets from a Twitter page by a gentleman, from a page of a gentleman by the name of Kurtz. I'm not sure how you say his name exactly. But I don't know the gentleman. I just happened to see this series of tweets, and I thought they were inspirational. I think he models well this whole concept of investing in the well-being of others. And I think this is a concept that we as a fellowship have, particularly witnessed by the fact that we do have this food parcel program, which we do. But I'm not satisfied that that's enough, right? I don't want to just have token investments in others, where we do this one thing and then we like satisfy, like, okay, now I did my good deed or my good investment, right? Let's think about more ways that we can invest more in the way of others. And this gentleman here just gives some really interesting ways in which he does it. And you'll notice as we go through these tweets, it's actually quite a few, so it's going to be quite a bit of reading here, so I apologize for all the reading, but I think it's interesting enough that it might be engaging. He takes a few shots at Dave Ramsey as we go through. You'll probably notice that. So here's what he says. I own a few rental properties in the low-income neighborhood I live in. I also help immigrant families who can't access traditional financing become homeowners. You might say we try to help low-income families find financial peace. And then he goes on with the series more tweets, and I believe he lives in Michigan. but I didn't actually double check that. So it goes on with some examples. We have a 3-bedroom house that rents for $600 to a retired Latino couple. Haven't raised the rent in 10 years. The market says we could rent it for at least $1,000 a month. No applause necessary. That itself feels greedy. Let's be real. Someone else literally pays my mortgage, building my wealth. We started purchasing some of these homes at a time when people even greedier than I crashed a housing market that sent disproportionate number of black and brown families packing. But we knew rentals weren't the way for them to build back their wealth. So, we started helping immigrant families purchase all the foreclosed and former rental properties on our street using investment dollars from friends from church. What were the results? So here lists out the results. My neighbors' monthly payments were cut in half from their rent. They work in construction trades, so they immediately started investing in remodeling, unlike the absentee landlords before them. 3. They started building wealth, estimated to be about $1.75 million for a dozen families. I believe that's about $150,000 per family. And 4. This is interesting. We could finally start building community with our neighbors because they would not be replaced by new tenants every 6 to 8 months. We had learned that profit must be redefined, expanded, and more encompassing. Wealth isn't what's in our savings account, but rather it's being a member of a community where everyone has enough and is financially resilient, except 7% profit when 50 is possible. When Hebrew prophets talked about financial peace, they talked about everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid, Micah 4:4. No longer would they be tenants of another person's field or of another person's house. The prophets talked about the better future because while ostensibly religious people fasted, offered sacrifices, threw festivals, they took advantage of the poor. They didn't think that their religion had anything to do with their business deals, their loans, and their tenant agreements. They built stone mansions, vineyards, and ivory-adorned gardens, and couches, and partied. Amos 5 and 6. It might have looked something like this. And it shows a picture of Dave Ramsey's house. Anyway, God couldn't stand it. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Amos 5:23-24. What was true for Israel is true for us today. If my financial peace depends upon the financial impoverishment of another, it is not Christ's peace. For all the talk about responsibility that Ramsey and others use to demonize poor people, isn't it ironic that he claims to have no power to control rent because the market displaces them? Well, how about we take personal responsibility for the greed that exploits others? But this isn't about Ramsey or even the rich. This is about me and anyone like me that has savings enough to build an investment property. Our temptation is of the rich fool to build bigger barns to store our surplus grains. Wealth without work is our idol. We just use more benign terms like passive income. I don't care about Ramsey. I care about you and me, choosing not to hoard manna, but only gathering that which is needful for our needs. And he tells a few stories of like how he actually structured some of these things. 10 years ago, I was a 32-year-old white kid playing the landlord to an older Latino couple who worked just as hard and made just as smart decisions as I did. In 1 week, my neighbors worked harder and logged in more hours than most people that I know do in 2. The only difference between us is that I had capital at a time when their world was crumbling underneath them. And capitalism works great for those of us who have capital. So we can choose whether the market determines whether rents are moral, and we can choose some other framework. As a Christian, I both believe and experience day to day that when we value others above ourselves, seek their interests along with ours, we will find joy, a sense of belonging, rootedness, and yes, financial peace. That is so much more valuable than whatever is in my 401k. This wealth may not show up in my savings account, but I see it from my front porch every single day. As long as we continue to act as if our faith is separate from questions of justice, we will never truly know who Jesus is. One more cool story about my amazing neighbor, Armando. Armando lived next door to me, but he lost his house because of a adjustable rate mortgage where after 7 years he never made a dent in the principal. He moved to a trailer park for a couple of years, but wanted to move back. The house across the street to me went into foreclosure. We watched the price drop and waited for it to drop some more. We called our realtor only to find out someone had just bought it for $18,000. My plan was to offer the guy $5,000 more than they paid for it the moment I saw him. Nice guy. He was from Iowa. I told him what we were trying to do. But this was an investment property to him, so he could send his kids to school, and he wasn't interested in selling. But he would finance it back to Armando. Cool. Doesn't have to be me doing this. A week later, he gave me the terms. Over 15 years, Armando would make payments totaling $150,000 for the house, which this guy bought for $18,000 and did nothing to. I wouldn't let that go unnoticed. What did I have to lose to offend another Iowan? I told him there's no way that I'd accept this for myself, so I'd never let Armando do it. The guilt trip worked. He sold it to me for $3,000 over the sales price. We got Armando back into the neighborhood. How long did it take for Armando to pay off his house once he got into it on fair terms? 16 months. Yeah, 16 months, not years. It's popular to say that we shouldn't give low-income people a fish, that we should teach them how to fish. Armando and most working-class people already do know how to fish. He knew how to save. He just didn't have the same pond to fish in that many of us do. So let's finish reading in Isaiah 58. And I'll just start there where I picked up. I'm going to just reread there what God said. I did not choose such a fast, says the Lord. Rather, loose every bond of wrongdoing, untie the knots of violent dealings, cancel the debts of the oppressed, and tear apart every unjust contract. That's what the guy Kurtz did, right? He wouldn't accept this unjust contract. So he tore apart the unjust contract. Break your bread for the hungry, and bring in the homeless poor into your house. If you see a naked man, clothe him, nor shall you disregard your offspring in your own household. Now notice, then your light shall break forth as the morning, and your healing shall spring forth quickly. Your righteousness shall go before you, and the glory of God shall cover you. Then shall you cry out, and God will hear you. While you are still speaking, he will say, Behold, I am here. If you take away your fatter, and the pointing of the finger, and the word of grumbling, and if you give your bread to the hungry for your soul, and satisfy the humble soul, then your light shall rise up in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as midday. God shall be with you continually, and you shall be satisfied as your soul desires. Your bones shall be enriched, and you shall be like a well-watered garden, and like a spring of water that does not fail. Your bones will arise and be enriched like a green plant, and they shall inherit generations of generations. Your ancient desert shall be built, and your ancient foundations shall be built from generations to generations. You shall be called builder of the walls, and will rest on the paths within them. If you turn away your foot from work because of the Sabbath, so as to not do your desire on the holy day, and if you shall call the Sabbath joyful, holy to your God, and not take away your foot for work, nor speak a word in wrath from your mouth, then shall you trust in the Lord, and he will bring you to the good things of the land, and feed you with the inheritance of Jacob your father. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken these things. What I see in this is that if we're willing to sacrificially invest in the well-being of others, God himself turns and he invests in us. and dwells with us. And that is what I long